The wedding dress felt more like a costume than any girlhood dream. My hand shook holding the bouquet. Jordan looked fine, older, serious. My mom kept dabbing at tears like she'd already lost me. Dad just looked pissed, muttering something about good Christian boy under his breath. Well, what's done is done, Mom said in that fake cheerful way a month later, shoving boxes of baby stuff into our tiny apartment. He's got a good job, at least. Jordan beamed over her shoulder. I wasn't sure if it was at me or the free crib. The whole big family talk was supposed to be later. Turns out, not so much after my family made it clear we were basically trailer trash now. Guess who's eating her words about one kid? Funny how that works. Jordan got his raise, those big family dreams got dusted off. I quit the diner job, said it was smarter with daycare costs. He didn't fight me on that. Less time around him meant less time pretending all this was some fairy tale. Truth is, I wasn't sure what I signed up for anymore. Those first few years, watching him leave before dawn, come back smelling of fast food. It started feeling less like a marriage, more like some job I hadn't applied for. Baby number 2 was supposed to fix all that, right? God knows my mom wouldn't shut up about grandkids. Years bled together. Doctor's appointments, ovulation trackers, all those negative pregnancy tests piling up. Jordan started getting that faraway look, the kind I was starting to wear like an old sweater instead of my wedding ring. Then the real fun started, that diagnosis, hanging over us like the church bells I thought I'd left behind. I knew what the doctor meant when he talked risks, but it felt like a dare more than a warning. We were all in, weren't we? Jordan and his big family dreams, my folks with their noses in our business. We both had something to prove. That empty hospital room felt like something out of a horror movie. The white walls were too bright, the smell of disinfectant too strong, like they were trying to scrub away the bad news hanging in the air. Jordan kept asking if I was sure they got the tests right. Bless him, he always had this way of making me feel a little bit crazy. I knew damn well what the doctor said, the echo of high risk of infertility just bouncing around in my head. My temper flared. They're doctors, Jordan, not idiots. Think they'd mess up something like this? He went quiet then, like a kicked dog. But when we got into the car, he turned to me, serious, and said, look, if it happens, it happens. We'll always have Jenny. It felt like a punch in the gut. It should have been sweet, a reassurance, but it felt more like giving up than anything else. The thought wouldn't leave my head. If this was it, just me and Jenny, would that be enough? Would that be enough for him? The chemo, I won't lie, it was hell. Hair falling out in clumps, the nausea that hit like waves crashing on a rock, and watching Jordan's face go thinner too. Worry does that to a person. But you know, there was something else there too. I'd see it when he looked away from me, checking his phone on the sly. Like he was already imagining a different life, a life after this one. Worse than the chemo, worse than anything, was when they said it wasn't working. That lump in my throat started to feel like it might choke me out. That's when I told him, voice all shaky, this could be it. Let's just go for it all, no holding back. He looked at me almost like I was a stranger, a sick stranger with no hope left. In the end, though, he nodded, that look of determination washing over him again. I remember the day I walked out of that hospital. It was gray and drizzly, the kind of day that makes you forget the sun even exists. I got home, took a long, hot shower, and stared at myself in the mirror. Bald, gaunt, but alive. And somehow, that felt like a different kind of power bubbling up. Maybe, just maybe, the game hadn't played out quite how I'd thought, but who said I couldn't change the rules? Even if I couldn't get pregnant, even if I lost the big family dream, maybe there were other dreams to fight for. The first fake pregnancy test. I remember it so clearly. Staring at that little pink line that wasn't supposed to be there, my whole body started buzzing. It wasn't guilt, exactly, not at first. More like stepping through a door I hadn't even realized was there the whole time. One I wasn't sure I ever would have been brave enough to walk through. Jordan, God love him, came home jumping around the kitchen like a kid on Christmas morning. He didn't look at me any different, but everything felt different. The way he lingered at the kitchen table, talking about moving to a bigger place, painting the spare room. I hated myself for how I soaked it in, playing the part perfectly. Even found myself looking at nursery furniture online. Not because I wanted to, but because I knew I had to. Then, the miscarriage. Another blur. Doctors poking and prodding, hushed voices, the smell of antiseptic. But in those hazy hospital days, in between the cramps and the tears, I felt something else. A strange kind of relief. Like, I had passed a test I didn't even know I was taking, and came out just fine on the other side. A couple more miscarriages, and even Jordan's optimism started to crack. He'd always been the glass half full type, but this was wearing him down. I could see it behind the smiles, the way he'd linger in the doorway before bed like he didn't want to disturb me. That's the thing about pity, gets old real fast. Then it happened, the stillbirth. That one almost broke me. The hospital room spinning, the nurses with those sad, practiced smiles. Jordan held my hand so tight it felt like he'd crack the bones, tears streaming down his face. But underneath the grief, that same relief I'd felt before flickered to life. Like a candle in a storm that couldn't quite be extinguished. Until that day he sat me down, all serious, and said, "Look, if it happens again, just don't tell me until you're sure, all right?" Too much heartbreak. I played the wounded wife, sniffling and nodding. He played the strong husband, the one protecting me. Inside, that candle flame grew a little brighter. The truth? I felt like I'd won the damn lottery. The perfect excuse, wrapped up in pity and concern. And Jordan? Well, he became less a husband and more like a project. Something to manage, to keep on track. He started working all those extra hours, eyes on the prize, that big family, that big house he thought was still on the horizon. Me, I kept up the act. A doctor's appointment here, a tearful breakdown there. Every time, he stepped up, moved forward, and I got to call the shots. It was a hell of a lot better than those early days, feeling like I was on some kind of probation. Waiting to prove I was worthy enough for the life we were supposed to have. The first time I looked at another man like really looked, it caught me by surprise. He was in that new coffee place Jordan hates, the one with the fancy names and prices to match. I was picking up some latte monstrosity to bribe Jordan into a good mood about a doctor's appointment. Not a real doctor, obviously, but they don't need to know that, do they? Anyway, this guy was young, probably close to my age when I got hitched. One of those fit, outdoorsy types, all muscles and easy smiles. It wasn't even attraction, not at first. More like envy. That carelessness, the way nothing seemed to hang heavy on his shoulders. Thing is, Jordan started to look different after that. Not physically, but smaller, somehow. The way he'd come home with that tired slump, the takeout bag already in his hand like it was part of the routine. That big family dream just seemed to wear him down a little more each day. I'm not proud of what happened next. Turns out there's a certain kind of power in feeling invisible. Jordan buried in spreadsheets and daycare pickups, me with my fake appointments and carefully timed tears. We were like ships passing in the night. Then, at some stupid work dinner for Jordan, I noticed him. Across the room, all cocky smiles and easy charm, and just like that, something snapped inside me. It wasn't an old flame, hell no, I'm not that dumb. More like reaching for proof that I still had a spark left. That first kiss tasted like stolen candy and cheap champagne. The guilt hit me later, like a bad hangover, but it faded fast. Because underneath it all, this felt right. Like I was getting something back that had been taken from me without me even knowing. Jordan got his late nights at work. I got mine too. Lies piled on top of lies, each one easier than the last. Getting pregnant wasn't hard this time. Obsessively tracking ovulation, every twinge and ache amplified. And then that damn line showed up on the test again. It wasn't the same rush this time, not like the first fake ones. It was more purposeful. Like a twisted kind of victory lap. I stared at that test, then at myself in the mirror. Was I scared? Sure. But more than anything, I felt steady. The ground under my feet finally felt solid. Jordan had his big family plans, and, well, now I had my own. Jordan's face was a mask when I slid those divorce papers across the table. I'd practiced this moment. Pictured the shock, the anger, maybe even a flicker of the old Jordan pleading with me to reconsider. What I got was cold. Colder than any of those late nights, any of those pitying glances. "I know," was all he said. Just those two words, and that spark of something, maybe even satisfaction, flickering behind them. Turns out, that big shot work promotion wasn't just about more money. It was also about longer hours, business trips, the perfume on his collar that wasn't mine. I'll give him this, he wasn't stupid, but neither was I. Before, those whispers of betrayal had fueled a kind of desperation. Now, it was something sharper, something steadier. Like flipping the game board, Jordan and his stupid dreams didn't matter as much anymore. I had my own plan to think of now. Hitting that 4-month mark was a different kind of milestone. Not the hopeful kind, more like the point of no return. Every day that bump grew bigger was another piece of leverage, another nail in the coffin of whatever future Jordan thought he had. I imagined myself telling him, the look on his face, not some tearful confession, but a declaration of war. But then, doubt crept in. The kind you feel in the pit of your stomach before a storm. What if it didn't work? What if he still walked away, tossed me and the baby aside like an old toy? That flicker of fear wasn't just about getting caught, it was about ending up with nothing. So I waited. Each trip to the mailbox was a gamble, divorce summons, or my little ace in the hole finally ready to play. It became a kind of sick addiction, that waiting. One day I'd feel strong, in control, ready to blow up his whole world. The next, that fear would bubble up again, making me want to hide, to curl up into some smaller version of myself. One thing was for sure, there was no going back. Not after I came this far. Every day it got harder to play the concerned wife routine, but easier to pretend that my whole world wasn't hanging by a thread. Each lie I told, each time I touched my belly and smiled, I was building a wall between him and me. Soon enough, he'd be just another player in my game, and let's face it, I was getting rather good at playing. The day I told him, it was a gamble. I'd tried to play it cool, waiting until he got home late, that tired look back in his eyes. Dropped the news like it was nothing. By the way, I'm pregnant. I watched him, waited for the shock, the confusion, even some flicker of obligation. Instead, that coldness I knew so well just spread across his face. Doesn't matter, he said, voice flat. Doesn't change anything. That's when the panic set in. All those carefully laid plans crumbling around me. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This was meant to make him stay, beg even. What do you mean? It's your child. I spat, but even I didn't sound convincing. He laughed then, a bitter sound. Is it, though? He pulled out his phone, scrolled through some messages. Photos. Him with another woman, younger, prettier, laughing in a way I haven't seen in years. You think I don't know? He said. You think I'm that stupid? Suddenly, it wasn't about the baby anymore, it was about power, about who had the upper hand. But he was one step ahead, damn him. The courtroom scene was a blur. Lawyers in fancy suits tossing around words like fraud and coercion. Jordan sitting ramrod straight, not even looking at me. But the moment the pregnancy was mentioned, everything shifted. His face twisted in anger, not the guilt I'd hoped for. His lawyer was sharp, painted me as this desperate woman, faking everything, even the cancer, to cling onto a marriage that was already over. My lies were laid bare, twisting in the air like dirty laundry. It should have been humiliating, but mostly, I just felt empty. Each accusation that landed was a blow against my own delusion, that clever plan shattered into 1,000 ugly pieces. Outside, reporters swarmed like flies. Everyone had an opinion now, it seemed. Some pitied me, the scorned wife. Others called me a monster, a manipulative witch. But through the noise, one thing was clear, it wasn't a victory, or some clever revenge. It was just a damn mess. And the worst part was, I was the one who'd made it. That damned lab coat sat on the kitchen table like a ticking bomb. It was Jordan's idea, the DNA test, paid for with money he probably shouldn't have spent on proving what he already knew in his gut. I tried to refuse, played the indignant mother-to-be, but in the end, I knew it was pointless. The clinic was all cold surfaces and even colder faces. The nurse drew blood from the baby, my baby, like I was nothing. And then came the waiting. Each day was a slow chokehold, the truth hanging in the air, ready to strangle me. The results came in a plain brown envelope. I didn't even have the nerve to open it myself. Jordan slid it across the table. 2 words stared back at me, not the father. The room seemed to spin. See? His voice was flat, dead. It was all a lie, the whole damn thing. Part of me should have felt relief. If the baby wasn't his, he couldn't walk away with it, right? But mostly, I just felt hollow. Like I'd fallen down some deep, dark well and could hear the echo of my own ruin. It got worse. Much worse. He wasn't just angry anymore, he was methodical. The lawyers came back, armed with a pile of evidence. I guess he'd been busy while I was playing my stupid games. The doctor who treated me during chemo, Turns out they'd gotten a sworn statement. The warnings about infertility were all documented. Every fake pregnancy test, every tearful breakdown, laid bare for the courts and anyone else who cared to look. And they did look. The newspapers had a field day. The desperate housewife, the cancer lie, the baby that wasn't even his. My folks went silent, ashamed. My daughter looked at me like I was some kind of monster in her own house. The friends I had left, the ones who bought my act, well, they evaporated too. Turns out, playing with fire gets you burned. I wasn't just getting a divorce anymore, Jordan was coming after me for everything. Some fancy legal word, fraud, something about intentional damage and ruining his reputation. I lost the house, the little bit of savings I had. Hell, I even lost my damn car. Every day I waited for the other shoe to drop, for the cops to show up at my dingy apartment, ready to make an example out of me. I should have been smarter, should have known there was no way to win this game. But it's too late for should'ves now. The first time I saw him again, it was in the grocery store of all places. He hadn't even been my type, not really. But desperation makes you look at the world differently. I almost didn't recognize him at first, clean shaven, wearing some kind of work shirt like he was a normal guy just buying cereal. Pathetic, really. He didn't see me at first, crouched down looking at boxes like he knew what the hell he was doing. Then our eyes met, and I saw that flicker of recognition. Disgust, mostly, but underneath it, a hint of fear. Maybe that's what finally snapped me out of my fog. I walked right up to him, close enough he could smell the stale coffee on my breath. You know, I said, real casual like, the funny thing is, I'm glad. Glad you're not the father. That kid deserves a better life than I could give it. His face went pale, hand tightening around that cereal box. I leaned in closer, whispered low enough only he could hear. You think this is over? Oh, honey, this is just getting started. He tried to move past me, but I grabbed his arm, nails digging in. He actually flinched. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by crumpled takeout bags and unpaid bills, a plan slowly forming in my head. Jordan had his fancy lawyers, his new life, that smug look on his face like he'd won. But wars aren't won in courtrooms, are they? I started small. Rumors spread online. His new girlfriend's old clients, his company's so-called ethical practices. People love a scandal, especially when it involves someone who's already fallen from grace. I got good at it. Fake accounts, burner phones, lies planted so carefully they sprouted up like weeds. Each one a twist of the knife, a little dose of the kind of chaos I'd become so familiar with. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd think back to that girl in the white dress, all those stupid dreams about a family that would never be. A part of me mourned her, that naive fool. But this me? The one sitting in the dark with revenge burning in her eyes? She felt alive in a way I hadn't in a long, long time. Let Jordan have his courtroom victories. My battlefield was the shadows, and I was just getting warmed up. After all, hell hath no fury like a woman who's got nothing left to lose. Sometimes I dream about having a time machine. Not for the big stuff, winning the lottery or changing history or whatever. Just for the little moments. Going back to that first date with Jordan, the way he smiled across the too fancy restaurant table. I'd whisper in my own ear, run, you stupid girl. Run far, far away. Of course, it doesn't work like that. But after what feels like 100 nights of the same bad dream, I'm starting to think a little delusion might not be so terrible. I even tried those cheesy meditation apps, the ones with the calming voices telling you to breathe. Turns out, rage doesn't mix too well with inner peace. The worst part is the quiet. My dingy apartment with its peeling paint and squeaky floors. No more fake happy chatter with Jenny over homework she's too smart for anyway. No more of Jordan's footsteps coming down the hall, that sigh he'd give that meant either stress or just plain disgust. Just me in that empty space where my grand plan was supposed to be. My lawyer had called, that pitying woman with her sensible shoes and sad eyes. Something about Jordan filing for full custody, how my instability made me an unfit mother. Mother. I choked on the word, tasting bile. Maybe Jordan was right all along. Maybe I was nothing but a monster. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. There's only one way to go, and that's up. And maybe up doesn't mean back to some pretend life of white picket fences and birthday parties. Maybe up means something different entirely. A voice whispered in my head, The same one that used to keep me up at night plotting revenge. Only this time, it didn't sound so